Chapter 1. Shadow Hunter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ding, the gentle voice of a woman resounded as the door of a small shop slid open. Welcome. At the same time, a beautiful face appeared on both sides of the door. She had big wavy blonde curls, bright red lips, a sparkling smile and assertive sweetness. But the person who pushed open the door did not look twice at her beautiful face. In fact, he frowned and yelled at the direction of the counter, "Sillin, get that old man Devon to change out a new face already, it's been so many years." The young man behind the counter busying himself with a bottle of wine shrugged, "No can do. The boss loves it. Give it up, it'll be easier to make him quit gambling than change out the display." Some of the patrons in the bar stirred and answered loudly with a laugh. As the dream lover of the entire male population on the planet 30 years ago, the face on the door had definitely sunk many hearts in the past. Time is the most cruel killer of them all, and beauty is one fragile gift. However, before this killer could act out, this beautiful singer and televised sweetheart had passed away first due to a failed gene transformation. During the first 10 years there were still many people who still kept this beautiful singer's holographic images and electronic posters in their room, but in the end, it had been 30 years. The tide rises, and the tide ebbs. Everything is as transient as the fleeting cloud. A new beauty would submerge the old star into oblivion, and there weren't many people who were willing to look back at a long-dead illusion. But of course, the owner of this bar was in fact a faithful man. Even though it had been 30 years, he still kept the beautiful singer's image on the welcome screen. 30 years and beyond, and it never changed. It was also one of the topics the patrons who frequented here often talked about. The newcomer curled his lips as if he disapproved of the owner's practice. He did not bother to comment on it further and walked to an empty spot on a table and sat down. There were familiar faces everywhere, and he quickly inserted himself into a conversation. He did not make an order. Sillin, that is the young man who stood by the counter, took down a bottle named "The Smile Under the Sun" from the wine cabinet and put it down on the visitor's table. He opened the cap, then left to serve drinks to the other patrons. Without wasting any more words, while he was still chatting with his companions around him, the newcomer had already grabbed the wine bottle in his hands and took a swig. "Ha, in the end this is still the most enjoyable drink. It has enough spice in it and packs a punch." Sillin gave him a smile and returned to the counter. He then logged the account into the tablet. This was a very normal bar, and the city it was in was also very normal. They were almost all citizens at the bottom level, and to borrow the words of the people from the center city, they would be known as the lower class, or in uglier terms, the rabble. The rabble have their own happiness. They love to sit in a bar where a human served them instead of a high-grade robot, drink cheap but strong alcohol, sit down with familiar drinking buddies and talk about everything in a day while complaining about their cruel bosses along the way, and gossip about someone else's gossip. It was a simple but happy life. The high-class people from downtown area did not understand the happiness of the poor. It was like a smartly dressed successful person walking on the path of gold and authority, and when they passed by a wreckage on occasion looking down on an excited stray cat leaping at a fly, they would think to themselves, "Just how bored are these people to be doing such a thing? No wonder they were known as a lowly life form." What is lowly, and what is noble? The 7 forms of genetic ranks, A, B, C, D, E, F, G were the lines to differentiate them all. Those with lowly genetics would be considered lowly people, and those with advanced genetics would be considered noble people. That was all. Including Sillin, everyone in the bar had F-rank genotypes, and on this planet they could be categorized as the lowly poor. Those with E-rank genotypes would be given the chance to work at the downtown area, and only those who were D-rank and above would be able to gain a foothold at the downtown area. As for those with G-rank genotypes, these were the saddest kind of people of them all. Because their natural genetics were inferior and defective, the sicknesses that came along with them could not be saved through simple treatments. Some examples would be severe deformity, progeria, and other congenital diseases. Silen's young ex-girlfriend Hina was a G-rank genotype. The cute girl never managed to walk past the best time of youth due to a factor of progeria, another congenital disease, and poverty. The descendants of those with high genetic quality and high-quality genotype would not be lacking. In fact, they would only get better. On the other hand, low genetic quality and low-quality genotype was the complete opposite, and social polarization was also turning more and more serious. Therefore, there were a lot more people of low-quality genotype who tried to undergo genetic transformation. However, those who succeeded were far and few, and even disregarding the huge amount of capital expenses, the chances of a successful genetic transformation was incredibly low in the first place. The higher one tried to improve their genotype, the harder it became, and this was exactly the source of pride of those with higher genotypes. The heartbreaker from 30 years also had turned into history exactly because she failed the genetic transformation. Man is fated not to be equaled the moment he was born. It is just that familiarity breeds indifference. Ah, Silen, old Devon hasn't shown up for many days already, has he? He still hasn't come back from his blind date. Someone yelled. Yeah, his chances should be pretty big this time, Silen replied with a smile. Say. No one looked convinced as they began chattering about old Devon's history of blind dates. Silen simply listened with a smile and did not offer an opinion. He did not tell them that actually, old Devon had struck jackpot and became rich overnight. Thus he went on to realize his dreams. Old Devon's dream, to find the E-rank genotype, neither too young nor too old lady, and take out the sperm he had saved inside the sperm bank. The best case scenario would be to give birth of an E-rank baby, open a small shop at the city area and lead a stable life. As long as he had money, it would not be a problem to find a woman of E-rank genotype, even if old Devon was a rank lower, an F-rank genotype. The annual water, land and sky competition was something the entire planet paid close attention about, and it was also the most anticipated event for gamblers. This was because that the prize was large enough that, even if the bets weren't completely accurate, as long as one achieved a particular standard, it would still turn a poor into the rich overnight. It was exactly because old Devon had struck jackpot that he was able to depart from his status of poverty. Of course, the reason old Devon managed to win the prize was mostly thanks to Silen. Every time old Devon makes a bet, he would first ask for Silen's opinion, and only then he would dare to wager. Old Devon might be a miser, but he did treat Silen very well, otherwise Silen would not have helped him in the first place. Moreover, this time old Devon had sent Silen the dividends of his prize on the same day. The night gradually deepened, and the patrons slowly left. Silen took a bath and changed his clothes, sprayed a special kind of chemical to eliminate the smells before locking up the shop's door. He glanced towards the black sky, and there were blinking tiny dots that were like finely crushed starlight. The weather forecast said that starting from 0000 hour there would be an hour of continuous rain, and now it was still 40 minutes away from 0000 hour. 40 minutes. It is enough. 30 minutes later, behind the cover of some jutted eaves and shacks, Silen arrived at an industrial zone. Dexterously and skillfully dodging the outside scans, he took out a magnetic card that he had prepared in advance and silently sneaked into a staff quarter beside the warehouse. After all, this wasn't the central city region, and the security system in this small place was neither advanced nor complicated. The person lying on the bed seemed to notice something, but before they, no mention of gender, could act, they lost consciousness and seemed to have sunk into deep sleep once more. But at a certain area behind the person's ears and neck, hidden beneath the hair, 3 thin black needles were stuck soundlessly behind it. Silen's hands gently swept the needles back into his possession, and after making sure that he had left no other traces behind, left the same way he slipped in the first place, behind the cover of eaves and shacks. There was the sky eye in the sky, and firearms would be detected by the local detection network. The only way to resolve a case silently and without anyone noticing was to do it the primitive way, because there were no energy fluctuations to be detected. As a hunter, Scylla could be said to have walked a difficult path. Due to his age and genotype, he could not become an honest hunter. More accurately speaking, Scylla was a shadow hunter, and a so-called shadow hunter was the generic term of people who worked together with a hunter but remained in the dark due to the sensitivity of their identities and so on. Since he was 14 years old until now, Scylla had been working as a shadow hunter for almost 3 years. His choice to become a hunter was initially due to Hina's sickness, and after Hina passed away, Scylla continued to persevere at this job because he needed a large amount of money to leave this planet safely. 5 minutes after Scylla left, another shadow slipped into the room and carried away the person Scylla had taken out, in order to exchange them for bounty and split the loot later. They had worked together for almost 3 years, but the hunter never knew the true identity of the shadow. Of course, the hunter didn't mind it as long as they could capture their prey smoothly and exchange them for bounty. The rest did not matter. Scylla also believed that the hunter he had chosen would never bother to spend a tremendous amount of effort tracking down his shadow's identity, because long before he picked his choice of partner, Scylla had already did a lot of homework analyzing a variety of potential scenarios from all angles. For the hunters who weren't really qualified to do their jobs, without a shadow, they could never have completed their assignment and earned the bounty, and would instead lose their lives. And so to a certain degree, these hunters and shadows shared a symbiotic relationship. As for the top-level hunters, they did not need a shadow at all. Of course, barring a hunter corp, those people were a special kind of existence of their own. Also, the hunter would not have realized that the shadow who worked with him, a D rank genotype, would only be at F rank. No one would have believed it even if he told the truth. It was midnight, 0000 hour, and rainfall resounded. Scylla sat inside a deserted building as he watched the droplets grew larger and larger. The rain would wash away any smell or subtle traces Scylla left behind, which was also one of the reasons why he had picked this time to act. How did a natural rain look like? Scylla didn't know. He had only seen one on television, and there was no natural rain on this planet at all. There were only the precisely controlled weathers by a weather station. The precise intensity of the sun, and the simulated thunderstorm, they were all artificial. A breeze blew over through the open cracks of the wall, and Scylla sniffed the smell of cement and slag. In addition, it was also mixed with an unexpectedly familiar smell. Scylla's eyebrows jumped as he carefully identified that particular smell in the wind. After confirming his suspicions, he wore a strange expression. He didn't think that there would still be people using that at this age and time. Translator's note. Hey guys, it's Crackshuan. Currently I'm translating single player only, Spirit Realm and now Star Rank Hunter. The reason I picked this up was because there are a lot of wuxia xianxia translated stories out there, but not nearly enough in other genres like horror, sci-fi, slice of life etc. I aim to change this slowly, starting with Star Rank Hunter. I sure hope y'all will enjoy this. Chapter 2. Guinea Pig. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Scylla's nose was very sensitive. He could differentiate and analyze mixed smells, and that was exactly why he found it surprising. The person who used these few reagents, were they bored out of their wits, conducting a hobby research or for a different reason entirely? These smells did not come from the rain outside. From the other smells mixed within the wind direction and air flow he could determine that this particular smell came from inside the building. But who would use such an ancient reagent inside such an abandoned building? Tracing the smell, Scylla found a pipe about the width of a thumb amidst a pile of rubbish. Scylla didn't walk too far along the pipeline before he found out that the rest of it was hidden inside the wall. It was hidden pretty well all right. Turning on his thumb-sized, closed-ranged projector flashlight, a light blue light was shown onto the wall, illuminating the pipeline buried behind the wall clearly. After some investigation, Scylla grew more and more curious. Interesting. In addition to this pipeline, Scylla had found several more, and they were all very well concealed. Scylla grew more and more cautious. Although the best course of action would be to leave right away, for some reason Scylla had a strange feeling that urged his desire to discover the truth. Following the pipeline downwards, he walked through many crooked paths, some of them even requiring Scylla to climb through some ancient vents. Arriving at the first floor of the building, Scylla opened a hidden cavern and walked down the narrow staircase beneath it and headed deeper inside. The surroundings were very quiet, but it wasn't exactly a complete silence. After a moment of careful sensing, Scylla felt that there shouldn't be anyone in his vicinity and proceeded to take out his flashlight and continued deeper inside. As the number of pipelines grew more and more numerous, Scylla understood that he was getting closer and closer to his target. He took a deep breath and turned off his flashlight. Although he hadn't sensed anyone in front of him, his instincts told him that the path before him would not a smooth one. Although the energy flux of a flashlight was at most 10 meters, to be safe Scylla still turned it off decisively. It was dark everywhere. Scylla relied on the minuscule airflow to decide his direction and avoid obstacles. About half an hour later the space around him gradually grew larger, and a number of electronic lights the size of a nail were also starting to appear. With the lights he could see that this place had existed for quite a while, and there were also a layer of dust on top of those electronic light panels. Although it wasn't really thick, no one had come through here for at least a month. Watching the light spots on the walls, Scylla grew more and more uneasy. Something is wrong, something is really wrong. This place looks just like a trap. A trap. An intense sense of crisis assaulted him, and without another thought Scylla turned around and ran immediately. His hunter's instincts were telling him that he could not the danger that might appear in the next moment. But the thick special steel plates that cut off his retreat path was even faster. With the turn of a palm a metallic dagger appeared in Scylla's hand. He could cut open the steel plate with a laser dagger, but one, it would waste a huge amount of time, and two, the laser's dagger powerful energy flux would expose his position constantly. With his back against the steel plate, Scylla quietly watched towards the front. He knew that there must be someone there. Ta, ta, ta. The footsteps closed leisurely towards him without the slightest intent of concealment at all. In fact, they carried within them a fearless attitude. Ka. A beam of light turned on, and the passageway instantly lit up. Scylla narrowed his eyes and swiftly recovered from the discomfort induced by the sudden exposure to strong light in a weak lighting environment. But the person standing opposite to him did not seem to be in a hurry as he waited for Scylla to recover. He was an old man who looked like an F-rank genotype human approaching his first 100, which was to say it felt like he would die at any moment. The old man's skin was brownish-yellow. He had a shriveled body, and his exposed arm showed clear signs of muscle atrophy. Scylla could not see the old man's eyes clearly because he was wearing a goggles. But it was this shriveled old man who had made every hair on Scylla's body shudder. The old man walked slowly towards Scylla, as leisurely as taking a walk in the park. He who strikes first gains the advantage. Scylla flew into action in a flash without leaving even an afterimage behind. From this one might notice his incredible speed, so much that it was comparable even to AD genotype human. Chang. The shrill voice of metal rang. Beside the old man's carotid artery, a twig-like hand had caught tightly of the tip of his dagger as easily as he would pinch a tree branch. The energy flux of either a plasma dagger or a laser dagger were simply too huge, and with Scylla's current constitution the chances that he would expose himself was also bigger, which was why Scylla was a lot more willing to use a cold weapon and commit murder without a trace. But even with his special alloy dagger his attack was blocked, not pinched, all too easily by this deathly old man. 3 years of life and death experience as a hunter left Scylla with no time to think. This was not an enemy that he could face. Run. But before Scylla could make a move, his body was suddenly tied up firmly by what seemed like wires of liquid metal. When Scylla searched for the thing's origin, he was shocked to discover that they came from the 5 fingers of the old man's other hand. More accurately speaking, it was the extension of the old man's finger. Is he a human? A machine? A mutant. Or an unknown type. It was an icy cold touch. Scylla could smell the breath of death. Every one of his pores were exuding coldness. Gotcha. The alloy dagger that had taken God knows how many wanted men's lives was crushed. Strangling his throat with skinny fingers, the old man lifted Scylla off the ground like a chick. All four of his limbs were bound, and even the blood vessels on his neck was almost blocked from the sheer pressure. Hee, you came at just the right time. Listening to his tone, it appeared that the old man was very happy, even a little impatient for what comes next. If the one being crushed was a normal person, they would have rolled their eyes a long time ago. But Scylla still had the willpower and energy to think of a way out of his predicament. The old man stared at Scylla and looked even more pleased. Door after door opened, and door after door closed. Scylla's shock grew bigger and bigger. To think that such a place was hidden beneath this poor town. This secret chamber could not have existed for less than 30 or 50 years old, and it was far more complex than Scylla had first imagined. Both its defense and its concealment were done exceptionally well, or it would not have remained hidden for so many years without anyone realizing it. Or perhaps the ones who did discover this place were all dead. Scylla looked sidelong at an open room, and there were numerous men put in liquid tanks like preserved specimens inside it. The twisted looks on their faces chilled Scylla to the bones. He could see that these people had suffered unbearable torment prior to their deaths. Perhaps Scylla would become one of them in the next moment. The old man did not intend to kill Scylla immediately. His control over the strength of his hands was extremely well. Not only did he give Scylla no chance to escape, he also made sure that he would not impair his body functions as well. As for why the old man had said that Scylla came at just the right time, this was because Scylla had walked right into his doorsteps just as the guinea pig before him expired and was placed inside a liquid tank. Scylla was carried into a room filled with all sizes of tools and instruments. The table at a corner of the room were filled with all sorts of jars and bottles. He had already identified some of the gases exhausted from the pipeline, and they were reagents used to purify DNA. At this age and time, almost no one but the old pedants would know such a primitive method to purify DNA. Scylla had done similar experiments before, but it was simply out of curiosity and he did not research it in depth. With current technology, a palm-sized apparatus was all that's needed to perform DNA purification. It was swift, precise, and could even perform functional analysis on genomes. But no matter the kind of purifying and analyzing apparatus, they all needed to be registered and verified under a real name. Every apparatus had a registration number, binding chip and data connection. Since the old man had chosen to perform a manual purification, and from the looks of it he was purifying by the bulk, it meant that he was engaged in the kind of illegal research that would make him a wanted man. But no matter how Scylla racked his brain, he could not find any most wanted information relating to the man before him. The planet's most wanted list was open to everyone regardless of their risk level. There were only two pieces of information on top of the arrest warrant. One was their photo, and the other their bounty. Because this laboratory was underground, and it was even covered with a rare layer of isotope barrier, hence it was not discovered by the sky eye. The data of these instruments should also be disconnected from the outside world, and so it escaped some other ways of investigation. What exactly is this old man planning to do? Placing Scylla on top of a floating white table, the old man pressed a button on an instrument. Scylla's wrists and forelimbs were cuffed by the manacles that appeared on the table. Many thin wires appeared on the table, slipped through his clothing and entered his body. In an instant Scylla was turned into a guinea pig studded with countless tubes. On one side he was filled with thin red tubes, and the other thin blue tubes. The numbers on a nearby display jumped continuously. Since Scylla was already bound by on top of the table, not even his fingers were spared. The old man then retracted his hand and returned his fingers to its original twig-like form. After injecting a sticky and ice-cold liquid into Scylla's body, he tapped swiftly the buttons on the instrument to combine and analyze the data from the other tens of instruments. Pain. Terrible pain that seeped right into the bones. His fingers were shaking, every blood in his body was flowing erratically, every second was challenging the limits of his nerves, and his mind was nearly destroyed instantly. But after a short blank period, with difficulty Scylla was finally able to refocus his thoughts little by little. Otherwise, it wouldn't take long before Scylla himself would become a member of those specimens. Those sticky liquid dot-like substance were actually many tiny special biochips. Some of its characteristics were very similar to vectors, and it could be integrated into the chromosome of a human body and undergo synchronous replication and division. The red tube's main function was induction. It provided sustenance at the same time it induced the subject's metabolism to accelerate cell division. On the other hand, the blue tubes controlled apoptosis. It killed off the cells that could not keep up. The old man watched the elevated spike on the screen and let out a few chuckles. He then turned a knob in his hand 10 degrees clockwise, and for every 10 degrees the rate of induction would rise to a new level, and the chip's activation rate would also increase. The cerebrum's hippocampus region, the DMRs in the chromosome, the frequency of intercellular communication and more were presented in data form on the repeatedly flashing display. They all made the old man incredibly excited. Scylla's nerves were assaulted once again by an even bigger wave of pain, and then arduously gathered his mind together again. Not bad. Not bad at all. To think that a mere F-rank genotype can come this far. The old man began talking to himself as he watched the knob that had been turned over 180 degrees, but his words betrayed his clear excitement. The figure 180 degrees meant that 50% of the chips had been activated, and yet this man was somehow still alive. The numbers flashing on the screen even caused a tremor in the old man's speaking voice. In the past, the guinea pigs that were able to endure beyond 180 degrees did not even reach half the total number, and it meant that the physical endurance of this mere F-rank genotype human was comparable to that of AD ranks. But how long could he last? Every time he lasted another 10 degrees there would be an extra set of data that excited the old man beyond belief, but he didn't care at all about Scylla's survival. Scylla continued to look for a chance to escape amidst the assaulting waves of pain. Chapter 3. Change. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Betwixt life and death, the terrible pain will destroy a person's will to survive. When you are faced with such a crossroad, you may wish to induce a deep trance of self-hypnosis and numb the nerves that transmit pain, to focus your mind, to think within the shortest possible time. Those were the words Genya had said to Scylla, but Scylla had never truly used it before, because he was never as completely helpless as he was right now. Hypnosis. Self-hypnosis. His entire body was convulsing. After drawing in a difficult breath, Scylla then closed his eyes. Watching the spike that had elevated yet another level on the screen, the old man's hand gave a shiver as he took off his goggles and pressed his face closer to the screen. His sunken eyes were completely glued to the screen as if he was trying to distinguish whether this was real. The knob had already turned 270 degrees. 75% of the chip had been activated. He wasn't looking at Scylla on top of the experiment bench. The old man was laughing a somewhat distorted laugh. Since the life indicator lines were still beating rather strongly, it meant that he could raise it some more. 280 degrees. 290 degrees. 300 degrees. The instruments were beginning to screech out a warning. The crimson-red warning sign and ear-piercing siren did not deter the old man in the least. Right now, his eyes were completely filled with madness. There were nearly 1,000 test subjects in the past, and none of them had managed to hold on until 300 degrees. But today. Heh. He. I, the one they call Ori, shall appear within glory and code. Scylla did not have any energy to pay attention to the old man's words right now, or he would have thought that the old man was a complete madman. How dare he dreamed of appearing inside Glory and Code with only these resources. Glory and Code were the two most famous electronic magazines in the interstellar network. They were hailed as the historical records of GAL, Galactic Alliance. With these two electronic magazines at the forefront, every other electronic publications in GAL were relegated into the background. They were also the only publications to have scored over 90 contribution points out of the 100-point electronic publication system set by GAL. That was to say, the achievements of personages or inventions research findings published in these two electronic magazines scored at the very least 90 contribution points. Any one of the personages, deeds, research and more that appeared in Glory and Code was enough to shake the entire GAL. Glory featured mostly generals and politicians, whereas Code featured academics and technicians. It didn't matter whether the records inside the two gigantic magazines were man or deeds, they were all built on top of countless manpower, resources, wealth and time. The planet Brown Earth Cylon was in had news that reached at best 20 or so contribution points, and they could only be recorded in magazines with small influences. In truth, any news that exceeded 10 contribution points would be broadcasted continuously for tens of days by the planet's TV station, much less one that was above 90 contribution points. Therefore, any normal person would have thought that the old man's words were but a delusion. The old man turned the knob once more. 310 degrees. 320 degrees. D. The alarm grew more and more urgent, and the fluctuation of Cylon's lifeline was starting to grow erratic. A few instruments were beginning to smoke and shudder with many bangs. A few buttons had also exploded, and it was looking to grow worse and worse. Even the tubes trapping Cylon were beginning to shake as if unable to handle the load. Ping! A finger lock trapping one of Cylon's fingers ricocheted off from high load. Ping! That was another one. The old man no longer had time to care for Cylon as all of his attention was absorbed by the data on the screen. His fingers clutched the knob, and he could not wait to see the final numbers. Buttons were flying off the instruments everywhere. There's no time. Cylon knew where his limits lay. His two released fingers had caught hold of a button from a button that ricocheted off some unknown instrument. It was the response of a single trace of sanity left after he had hypnotized himself under intense pain. It was also Cylon's last chance. It was only a trace of sanity, and yet its calculation was surprisingly accurate, unprecedentedly accurate, just like the control and error analysis conducted by a sophisticated instrument. In less than a second Cylon fired out the button in his hands. Pooh! The flying button rebounded 3 times across the floor, the wall and the baffle plate of an instrument before it shot through the old man's left eye into the central nervous system of the brain, cutting off his neural network circuit and killing him instantly. It was the same instant the madman's fingers on the knob were ready to make the final adjustments, and the numbers on the knob were already pointing towards 350 degrees, so it would not be an exaggeration to say that it was literally in the nick of time. If the knob really was turned to 360 degrees, then Cylon would not have lived as well. Thank God that the old man was an actual human being, and thank God the old man hadn't made crazy modifications to his entire body. The old man who was dead in an instant laid beside the instrument. The moment the old man died, all of the tubes that bounded Cylon were retracted. A warning popped up on top of the instrument, and an electronically synthesized voice resounded, "The host is dead. Begin program deletion." Cylon could not afford to attend to his still somewhat paralyzed body as he turned around and fell down from the bench. He could not stand up. He could only lift his head and watch the images and data flashing instantaneously across those screens. Every information that was about to be deleted would flash once across the screen. It was unimaginable that the old man would set up such a strange deletion pattern. There was no telling if a rank B, or even an rank A genotype human would be able to capture all those images and data, and even if they did they might not necessarily be able to memorize it, and this assumption was limited to just a single screen. But Scylla was able to memorize all the information from the tens of screens into his head. In the past this would have been absolutely impossible. Although he had a pretty good memory before this, there was no way his capture speed could have kept up, let alone memorizing tens of screens at once. His body was adjusting quickly. Scylla's eyes appeared to be out of focus, but he was in fact etching all the information on the screen into his brain. The thing the old man had injected him with was like an unknown bomb. If he could not decipher these information, then he might not even know how he died. 5 minutes later the programs had been deleted completely, and all information relating to the experiment, including the information of the old man Ori Hansen, were memorized inside Scylla's head as long as they had flashed across the screen. Program deletion complete. Self-destruction program to be executed in 5 minutes. Countdown to desertification in. Fuck. Scylla cursed. He moved a little his body that had recovered some senses, lifted himself up with difficulty and staggered towards the exit. Every door beneath the underground laboratory was open. Those other rooms were used for storage such as the specimens, food, equipment, medicine and so on. The true core of the lab was this room that Scylla had stayed in, so he had neither the thought nor the time to check out the items in other rooms. Rely on his memories, retraced his way back through the path he was brought in. All the doors were opened, and he was not obstructed along the entire way. It was as if everything had been premeditated. It was exactly 5 minutes. The desertification program had activated when Scylla reached the vents at the edge of the laboratory. A quicksand-like depression appeared at the center of the lab, and it extended outwards and turned the floor, the lab instruments and the dead old man all into quicksand. The area of desertification began to spread. When Scylla climbed out of the vent and returned to the building from before, the desertification had just reached the vents. Scylla had no time to rest. He knew that the old man, so-called self-destruction program would definitely not be just desertification. In order to make sure that his researching findings were not compromised, he had even bound his own life to every program in the place. If he could be this ruthless, then he would definitely ensure a more thorough destruction. Thankfully the sun wasn't up yet, and there were no people on the streets. Under the cover of darkness, Scylla moved while sticking close to paths beneath the shacks and eaves. If he was discovered by the Sci-fi, then it would be all for naught. Sure enough, not too long after Scylla had left, the huge sound of an explosion woke up every man from their sleep. There was a mushroom cloud billowed into the sky. Dazzling flames. A deep and wide chasm on the ground. The buildings that were affected by the blast wave and collapsed were left with broken walls and a state of ruination. The kids who were woken up were crying and screaming, the adults were cursing non-stop. Before any curious personnel could approach the blast site, a white light descended from the sky to cover the entire blast zone in a prison of white light and isolate it from the outside world. The Sky-Eye had made its response. It wouldn't be long before the patrols of the police force would come over and check out the situation. But they were none of Scylla's concerns. When he slipped back to his small 10 square meters wide room at the poverty area, his nerves finally and gradually lost their high tension as he fell into a deep slumber. Chapter 4. Jenya's Secret. You are listening at novelfull.audio. An information recorded inside Scylla's head flashed across his dreams, and a change was also happening inside his body. It was 2 days later when he reopened his eyes. Scylla did not go to old Devon's shop, but instead went to Jenya's, his master's home. Scylla was picked up by Jenya from the woods at the west side of the town. At the time, due to the high-energy radiation of an abnormal solar flare causing its neighboring planet's food crops to fail and the price of sustenance medicine to skyrocket, it was a terrible disaster for the poor. Many people were starved to death, and the kids whom they could not afford to feed were sold to the rich people in the bustling city. Scylla was the kind who wasn't sold off in time. On that day, a scrimmage had happened in the West Woods due to a food shortage problem, and when Genya got there the only one still alive was Silen, placed inside a tree hole, still wrapped within his swaddling clothes. Genya was only an F-rank genotype, and yet he lived and fought better than a D rank. Genya had taught him Silen a set of exercises that, as compared to the ones he saw on TV, was improved upon on the many aspects of human kinesiology. These exercises were later used by Silen for hunting. Genya once said that this set of exercises were originally adapted from actual martial arts techniques. He had removed the killing aspect of it and added some moderation, but Silen himself was slowly able to recover the removed parts through actual practice. Genya passed away when Silen was 12 years old. No one knew how old Genya was. Silen only knew that his master was not an ordinary person. The rest was a mystery. Every month Silen would come over and tidy up Genya's home. The arrangements inside the house weren't shabby. It gave off a feeling of simplicity and peacefulness, and it was just as humble and unremarkable as Genya himself. He was obviously not short of money, and yet he was willing to live his life quietly in this poverty area. There was a huge tree over 20 meters tall at the backyard. Its canopy was big enough to cover more than half the backyard. Genya once said that there might be only one such tree in the entire galaxy. Silen walked until he was beside the tree, and took out the crystal dot-like pendant hanging around his neck. "Master, Hina and I are here to see you." There was only Genya and Hina in his world. Well, he supposed that old Devon barely made the count too. But Genya and Hina were already gone, and old Devon too was starting a new life of his own. He sat down with his back against the tree. Fine beams of light shone down from above, and yet he couldn't feel much temperature from them. "It's just me again." Silen lifted his arm and in accordance to the information he had understood inside his brain, controlled the chip's activation. He looked at his arms. On the outside it looked exactly the same as before, and yet he could now easily penetrate a 10 centimeters thick steel plate with them, just like that crazy old man who had easily crushed his alloy dagger. He hadn't digested much of the information stored inside his head, only the basics such as the control over his body muscles just now, or the activation and halting of his genes. It was worth mentioning that thanks to the integration brought forth by the injected chips, Silen's genotype had reached the level of B rank right now. Before Genya had shut his eyes forever, he once said to Silen that, if one day Silen managed to upgrade his genotype to rank C, then he could open that box inside his room. If he couldn't, then he should never open it. Getting up, Silen walked inside the room Genya once stayed and opened the cupboard. There was a box that looked like it was wood made lying quietly inside it. There was an invisible layer of protective film surrounding the small box, and it was used to evaluate the rank of a person's genotype. Silen once ricocheted. Chapter 5. The chip's ability. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The sheriff himself had come over to supervise the situation because of the explosion, and every day the people living around the explosion area would be questioned. The people were worried, and there were plenty of shops in town that did not open for business, which was why no one would notice even if Silen did not go to the bar. Moreover, the place Silen lived in was the poorest region in the area, so the sheriff simply made a few superficial inquiries before leaving the place. Silen was not among the questioned. He went back to the streets in town again, but Silen did not plan to reopen the shop and continue the business. Instead he contacted old Devon. After all, he should communicate with the boss about the matter of his shop. Old Devon was currently hot in love, and his face glowed with a ruddy color. Just he had dreamed old Devon found a suitably aged E-rank genotype woman for himself and was currently planning for life after marriage. When he heard that Silen was ready to venture out to the world, he had thought that Silen was simply trying his luck in the downtown area. As his elder old Devon had lent Silen some advice, but he did not say anything more than that. Young people have all the energy in the world, and it is good to have something to strive for. After all, Silen was only 17 years old. Old Devon himself did not plan to come back, and he gifted the little shop to Silen. The geography of the bar was bad in the first place, and even if he managed to sell it, it wouldn't sell for much money. Old Devon also did not know anyone in the city region, and he could not help Scylla in terms of contacts, so he planned to give Scylla some money instead. But Scylla turned down his offer. After turning down Old Devon, Scylla told him to take care of himself before ending the conversation. His savings were far more than Old Devon could ever have imagined. Scylla did not plan to sell the bar immediately, and instead rented it to a person who lived in the poverty area as well. He was fine as long as they did not neglect to deposit their rent to his card every year. He went back to his poor little room and packed up his stuff. On the same night Scylla went back to Jenya's place again, and unlike last time's open visit, he made sure to keep this trip well hidden due to a very critical matter. Plus, Jenya's place had excellent security, and the effects of its defensive shield's internal and external signal were very good. It added another layer of security. Inside the room, Scylla first relaxed his body before he began to channel the changes inside his body. Since the chips that were integrated into Scylla genes had seeped into his every cell through replication of the host body and blood transportation, Scylla's current aim was to make the chips to undergo selective expression. Of course, since the chips did not reach 100% during its initial activation, any selective expression it underwent would be limited. The order was sent down from his brain, and the information from the central nervous system was relayed to every chip inside the cell. The chips began to express selectively, and even the genome's expression were disrupted and underwent a transformation. The most obvious one was Scylla's appearances. His facial bones began to change. His hair, eyes and skin color were changing, and even his skeletal frame had undergone a transformation. This was neither short-term coloring nor plastic surgery, it was a transformation that happened in his very DNA. It could not be detected even by an advanced instrument because it was a control and change at the very source of his being. This was Scylla's real trump card. According to the data and information left behind by Ori, the host body could theoretically cause the original DNA of his cells to undergo recombination, fragmentation, deletion or mutation through control of the chip. For example, if someone tried to examine Scylla's DNA information, then Scylla could control the cells of his body fluid, his hair or other parts of his body to undergo a change prior to its departure from the body, thus resulting in the other's party failure to examine Scylla's true DNA information. But because the chips had not been completely activated, every time he underwent a massive transformation there needed to be a period of stabilization and easing before he could control and change from the source again. Once the sounds of bones cracking stopped, and Scylla sensed that the rest of the transformation was complete, he was left somewhat speechless staring at the person inside the mirror. The black-haired, black-eyed, dark-skinned and healthy sunshine boy from before was transformed into someone with light gray hair, dark blue eyes, pale white skin and an even thinner frame. No matter how you looked at it, he looked like one of those rich kids from the cities. His face wasn't exactly extraordinarily handsome, but it was definitely shapely. Overall he didn't look as imposing as he was before. Scylla frowned. He wasn't too impressed with his new look, but because the chip wasn't activated perfectly he had no way of dealing with some of the superficial changes. Never mind, let's just leave it like this and use it for the moment. Jenya once said that there were only two kinds of people who could change the world. One of them is God, and the other one a madman. Scylla thought that the old man Ori belonged to the second category. As for whether or not it could really reach the level of glory and honor, that remained to be seen, but he had to admit that Ori was a devil of a genius. To think that he could create something this insane with just this level of equipment and mostly manual operations. Scylla had spent a large amount of money to purchase a blank identification card from the black market. Both its serial number and magnetic print were verifiable by the officials. Scylla first entered his name and photo and other forged information into the ID card. Then he swiped it across the card slot of an instrument. The screen immediately displayed Scylla's current personal identity information. As long as the officials did not dig deep, this ID card would not draw suspicion from the inspectors. Other than the ID card, Scylla had also purchased a galaxy-wide debit card from the black market, and after a series of complicated but careful operations, Scylla deposited the rest of his money into the card. In order to obtain these two cards, Scylla had spent over a few million star currency. He had barely a tenth of his savings left. Moreover, without a proper channel it was impossible to acquire these items through money alone. It was one of the benefits Scylla enjoyed having worked for 3 years as a hunter. The next day, the greatly changed Scylla dressed lightly and boarded the flight between X.C362 to X.C100. He did not encounter any problems with his ID card or the spaceport security inspection. Scylla touched the curly leaf pattern on his left thumb as he sat on the spaceliner's seat. The security check had failed to scan it at all. If this was just an average subspace object, then there was no way it would have gone this smoothly, not to mention the guns and other dangerous articles stored inside it. L.RG. He pressed a button on his seat, and a screen appeared in front of him. It showed the scenery outside of the spaceship. Scylla might have lived in that poor little town, but as a shadow hunter he had traveled to many places around the planet. But from this point of view it was yet another kind of feeling that people usually referred to as mixed emotions. The towering skyscrapers, the bustling cities. Slowly they turned smaller and blurrier until the entire planet itself was presented before him. For the first time Xylome saw the true nature of the Sky Eye, an array of satellites. They monitored everything on the ground and would take measures at first notice, just like how it had dropped down a protective light shield to control the area of destruction that night. Scylla took out the pendant hanging below his neck so it could have a good look at this planet. Hina, Master, we're departing. I wonder when we'll be able to come back. Chapter 6. That Weird Uncle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Planet X.C100 was the equivalent to a transport hub in Sector X. The turnover between the sectors divided by the Star Alliance mostly happened on Planet X.C100. Every day, there were tens of thousands of spacecrafts and spaceships landing and taking off within the area, and Scylla's destination lay between Sector D to M, the sectors categorized as the 10 rapidly developing, free trade sectors. Sector X was at best a backward sector. On the other hand, sectors A to C were not easy places to gain a firm foothold in. Sector A was populated by political organizations, and the Galactic Alliance's coalition government could be found in this area. Sector B was famed for its many academies and financial tradings. As for Sector C, most of the land fell under military reservations, and Gao's most famous military academy, GL Military Academy, could be found right here. Sectors ABC were known by the people of GAL as the Shining Three Sectors, and they weren't a place anyone could go. The waters ran deep, and there was no telling when one might get eliminated for some inexplicable reasons. Sitting inside a restaurant near the spaceport, Scylla propped his chin and looked at the scenery outside. As compared to brown Earth's bustling chaos, the terminal planet X.C100 looked to be systematic and in perfect order everywhere, be it as big as a freighter or as small as the flying cars driving swiftly across the roads. The transportation hub of Sector X certainly lived up to its name. Scylla bought a tabloid. The flashing animations and eye-catching names could always inject some freshness into people's everyday lives. The ticket to Sector K had already been purchased, and all Scylla needed to do was wait. In the meanwhile Scylla sipped his cup of tea. Be it his sitting, drinking or reading posture, the impression Scylla gave was that of a very cultured person. It was something he cultivated following Genya since a young age, and he did not look like someone from the poor area at all. But of course, this was just a disguise to match his current appearance. He could just as easily give the impression of a ruffian if he wanted to. Hey sweetie, got a free table for me? A young man with brown shoulder-length curls wearing a pair of sunglasses and somewhat fancy clothing walked into the lounge holding a big black briefcase. The top 2 buttons of his shirts were unbuttoned, revealing well-defined muscles, a testament to his explosive masculinity. He teased the waitress serving him, staring unabashedly at her well-formed breasts. He was right next to a robot waiter, and yet he just had to ask for the waitress on the other side of the counter. But such flirtations were pretty common, and the waitress herself was obviously not surprised by the situation as she continued to answer him with a smile, "I'm really sorry, but we don't have a free table at the moment. However, there are empty seats, so would you like to wait or join another table?" "Ah, man. So there aren't any tables left. How unfortunate." The young man looked around the lounge through his sunglasses before finally stopping at Silen's table. That table will do. Guess I'll just squeeze with our little buddy over there." "Okay. This way please." The waitress' smile was a bit stiff. It was a standard 6-man table and there was only a person sitting there, 2 including him. Why would he ever need to squeeze? Although there were several tables in the lounge that were seated with only 1 or 2 people, Diaz had picked this particular table on purpose. The kid had given him a very strange feeling, one that he just could not describe, and for some reason he even looked vaguely familiar, although he couldn't for the life of him recall where at the moment. Placing his briefcase at a side casually, Diaz sits down on the opposite side of Silen. He had no plans to take off his sunglasses even though he was inside the lounge. He tentatively categorized this under playing it cool. Receiving the menu from the waitress, his fingers slid repeatedly across its surface as he flicked and selected through various menu screens. Let's have these orders for now. Alright, please wait for a moment. After he finished ordering, Diaz looked towards the reading Silen and said, "Hey, little buddy. Waiting for your flight?" Silen lifted his head, smiled gracefully, and with an "I am very cultured" look answered, "Yes, uncle." Uncle. Did this Sanovovich just call a handsome, charming, brilliant and attractive person like me uncle? If Tsilin was one of his men he would have given him a taste of the sole of his foot already, but, Interesting. From the moment Diaz walked into the lounge, Silen had kept an eye on him. He might know nothing about this young man, but Silen had a feeling that this man was very powerful, more powerful than anyone he had met before. Even though the other party had called him, a 17-years-old, little buddy, Silen did not react angrily encountered with an uncle, instead. Diaz gave a short laugh and picked up his served drink. He drank it in one go, "Same here. I've already bought the ticket to Sector K. And you?" "Me too." "Why, it looks like the two of us are tied by fate." The waitress serving the pastries rolled her eyes on the inside when she heard him. "Tied by fate my ass, 80% of the people hanging around here are waiting for the flight to Sector K. If he is the only person in the room tied to you by fate, then does that mean everyone else are unevolved apes?" "Much thanks, sweetie." While speaking Diaz had even brushed lightly across the back of the waitress' soft white hand in a most flirtatious manner. "You're welcome." She smiled and ignored him completely. Diaz didn't really mind it. Turning his head around, he began chatting nonchalantly with Silen and made some small comments about the news on today's morning paper. The majority of them were scornful and criticizing. Most of the time Silen played the role of a quiet listener, and it was only when Diaz asked something that he would nod once or give a short answer or two. Meanwhile Diaz shuffled closer and closer towards Silen, and although Silen appeared relaxed, he was tensed on the inside, muscles ready to react at the slightest trouble. "Alas, I have forgotten to introduce myself." Diaz shoved himself in front of Silen with a suspicious look while saying with utterly undisguised pride, "I am Diaz." Once finished, Diaz leaned backwards against the soft chair, folded his arms and smirked. If someone translated his expression it would be, "Revere me. Worship me. Your God is right here." There were invisible light boards surrounding every table, so the people on the other side of the light board would not be able to hear their conversations. Moreover, while Diaz was speaking he casually covered up with his arms so that the people outside would not be able to read his lips. Naturally it was impossible to determine what he said through his lips. Silen blinked. For a moment he couldn't figure out what the dude was so smug about. Oh. I am Scylla. Dot. Scylla's reactions actually caused Dias to choke a little. That can't be right. If he's from one of those families, then there's no way he hasn't heard about me. Dias gave Scylla a strange look, but then he replied immediately with keen interest, "You're so funny." Scylla. Dot. And where exactly did this funny come from? Ahem, anyway. I guess we know each other now. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Scylla. Dias stretched his hand. Scylla stared blankly at Dias' outstretched hand for a second before smiling and returned, "It's a pleasure to meet you too, Mr. Dias." The handshake lasted only for a brief moment, but on the inside Scylla was well and truly shocked. Once contact was made with the other party, his chip would feed back information to him, and through this information Scylla had found out that this Dias was actually an A-rank genotype. Scylla did come into contact with several people around earlier, but they were at best B rank. To think that this person before him was actually an A rank, Scylla had not expected to meet a character this level so soon. Is he a hunter? Generally speaking, a handshake was not a common ritual. But hunters loved hugs and handshakes a lot because there would be a form of contest during the process. Competition of strength was an effective way most hunters employed when interacting with each other, and not everyone would have the courage and insight to accept these rituals. Those who overestimated themselves might bring severe injuries and even death upon themselves. But all Dias saw from Scylla was momentary surprise before he proceeded to receive the etiquette. He reflected inside his heart, this guy isn't too bad. Although Dias himself had not pulled any cheap tricks during the handshake, he thought Scylla was a pretty interesting boy to return his grip so calmly and fearlessly. Should he say that he had a screw loose in his head? Or was he a different book from his cover? Probably the latter, Dias thought to himself. But judging from Scylla's reactions, it appeared that he really didn't know him. Just where did this little guy come from? Scylla had told him frankly that he was called Scylla. As for his surname, Scylla made no mention of it at all, so it wouldn't be right for Dias to ask about it either. How very curious. It was at this moment the flight announcement had sounded, and more than 80% of the people inside the lounge got up and headed towards the station. Dias stuck to Scylla like glue as they entered the station together. There were a few thousand people aboard this flight. Scylla picked neither the first-class nor the third-class cabin, and instead chose a seat at the medium-class cabin. To his surprise, Dias had also picked a medium-class cabin, and he even deliberately exchanged seats with another person and sat beside Scylla. Even when he was inside the cabin, Dias did not look like he had any intentions to take off his sunglasses. Scylla had a feeling that this flight would not be as smooth. Chapter 7. Robbery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The three seats were connected, and Dias sat at the right side of Scylla. To Scylla's left was another youngster around Scylla's age. The youngster shuffled in his seat repeatedly, looking a little nervous, and when he saw Scylla frowning slightly, he tugged at the corner of his lips and said, "Bro, don't worry, the flight path of the spaceliners from planet X.C-100 is the product of precise calculations. It is different from the spaceliners from other planets, its safety factor is at least tens of times higher. The chance of running into a magnetic anomaly is less than 0.01%, and the chance of encountering a space robber is even less. Moreover, flights from X.C-100 are protected under special laws." While listening to the youngster's mostly self-comforting naggings, Scylla noticed that the corner of Dias' lips were upturned ever so slightly. He couldn't help but feel that the son of a bitch was smiling in a way that was up to no good. Once the ship had entered warp flight, some of the conversations began to quiet down since the passengers needed to divert more energy to suppress the discomfort of traveling under such conditions. Meanwhile, Scylla lay down his seat, pulled up the blankets, closed his eyes and began to sleep. Dias just felt funny watching Scylla's reactions. This little guy was sleeping quite soundly, he must be quite used to this. Both his physical and psychological qualities were pretty good. What he didn't know was that this was in fact the first time Scylla had slept during a warp flight. But although he was sleeping, every hair on Silen's body was absorbing the surroundings around him, and especially killing intent. He would wake up if he detected even the slightest bit of it. However, Silen didn't manage to sleep too long before an abrupt shaking woke him. Magnetic interference and force field has affected the helm's control, and the pulse power isn't functioning normally as well. With these changes, the control systems aren't going to last much longer. This ship will exit warp flight. Diaz calmly assessed the situation before him. It's probably due to deliberate interference on the outside. If my guess is correct, then we've run into space robbers. When the boy beside Silen heard the words, magnetic interference and force fields, he was already so frightened that he turned deathly pale, and the latter words, space robbers, from Diaz was without a doubt an unbearably heavy blow for the boy. Therefore the poor kid had fainted straight away. Diaz's voice wasn't loud and only the three of them could hear his words, but the other passengers had also formed their own respective assumptions. Chapter 8. Vanguard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Diaz took out a book of some sort, dark gold in color, and wrote something while grinning, then cheerfully tore the foremost page and stuck it at the most obvious spot near the entrance. The thin sheet that was originally just the size of a palm expanded until it was as big as the black briefcase. The shining numbers and a dagger-shaped emblem was especially glaring. This thing that looks like a notice is a bill. When Silen saw the emblem, his pupil shrank and his heart jumped suddenly. The Vanguard. The emblem of one of the top 4 Galactic Alliance hunter regiments, Vanguard. The top 4 hunter regiments were different from the other hunters that worked alone or in small groups. They had bigger goals that were so big they were breathtaking. From the discovery of a new habitable planet, to the pioneering of a sector, and a large number of mineral transactions and so on. They were all not without their presence. Their targets might be a certain family, an organization, a city, and even a planet or an unknown region in the galaxy. And they have the power to do it. It wasn't something any average hunter could undertake. What was worth mentioning was that the information about the top 4 hunter regiments took up to 80% space in the electronic magazine, Hero, which was preceded only to Glory and Code in GAL with a contribution of 80 points and above. Hence one could imagine the influence the top 4 hunter regiments held. They were an existence that authorities couldn't help but be wary of. The security squad bustled over in a hurry, but when the security squad leader walked into the control room and saw that shining notice, his already partially dark face immediately turned as black as coal. That was how the series of events unfolded, and Diaz was even able to screw some money out of X.C-100's government and Spaceliner company because he helped taking down the robbers. Although Diaz had explained it in a very casual manner, Silen knew that many of these details were actually quite difficult to manage. It also proved that Diaz's true strength and ability to plan and control. He really was worthy of his title as the lieutenant commander of the 6th B Squadron. Diaz introduced Silen to the ship as he led him along the passageway. That is the warehouse, the place used to store supplies, and a right turn at the front is. Hey, Doe, why are you sleeping around here? Diaz called out towards a particular section on the wall of the passageway. At first glance it would have been easy to miss it, but if someone was alert enough or had very acute senses, then they would realize that there was actually a life form right there. It's just that it seemed to have merged with its surroundings into one, and it was impossible to see it judging just from the color of its body. Diaz walked over and pulled that thing down. It was about 30 centimeters long, and when it separated from the passage wall its color immediately faded and turned invisible. However, its 2 little eyes were rather obvious, milling about in circles, and when it saw Diaz it made a slurping sound, seemingly greeting the guy. An iguana. Silen stared curiously at the little fellow in Diaz's hands. Stop pretending. What kind of bad things did you do to make Yudi throw you out again? Diaz flicked Doe, the iguana's head. Doe curled his tail and waved it about looking pitiful. Diaz sked once before kneading the small iguana into a ball just like an actual doe and pack. Flung it against the other side of the wall. It stuck on it and quickly changed its body color to match its surroundings, and on the surface it appeared to have become one with its environment. That fellow's called Doe. He's a variant Yudi picked up on a mission 5 years ago. Little bastard quite often causes trouble. Diaz did not elaborate on the personnel named Yudi. Diaz brought Scylla to the main control room and introduced him to a few more personnel. While allowing Scylla to interact with the others, Diaz called Beaver over. Beaver, come with me for a moment. Yes, Lieutenant. Scylla had seen the personnel Beaver before. He was the one who had appeared on the spaceliner display. What surprised Scylla was that everyone on this starship was fairly young. Many of them were around Diaz's age or younger, although none of them were as young as Scylla. Taking heed from Carrie's lesson, the people on this starship treated Scylla fairly well. Although they weren't really cordial, at least they were neither distant nor indifferent towards him. After Diaz had called over Beaver, they arrived at Beaver's workplace. He turned the silver ring on his hand and popped out a connector before connecting it to an instrument. Give this footage a run-through. The footage running on the screen was the one captured by Diaz while he was fighting the robbers inside the spaceliner's control room. There was infrared processing, so the darkness at the time was nothing. However, the footage grew a little confusing as it followed Diaz's movements fighting the robbers. Beaver did not say anything. His 10 fingers danced across the instrument as he manipulated the programs, and after the screen's footage was cut, put through 3-dimensional arrangement, bit rate adjustments and other workings, it soon became a clear and smooth footage that didn't dazzle the eyes. Analyze that Scylla kid right now. Diaz had lost his usual casualness and flippant attitude. In fact, he even looked somewhat serious. Beaver adjusted the images on the screen to display Scylla's every move in slow motion. The more he watched, the more shocked Beaver was. Lieutenant, are you sure this guy's a human and not some other races that look like a human? On the screen, Scylla had easily dodged away from where the guns were pointed at as if he had predicted the robbers' every next move. And he had done it while every light source inside the control room was cut. I can confirm that he did not wear any kind of auxiliary lens and that he is definitely human. Diaz said solemnly while staring at the display. Beaver's eyebrows were close to forming knots already. There's one more thing, Lieutenant. When the two of you warped over, I conducted a genetic rank analysis on Scylla. Normally speaking, if he was just a B-rank genotype, the reliability of the calculated results of the MFA, multiple factor analysis, should be above 95%. But this time the result was only at 90%. Why is there a 5% of uncertainty? After a pause, Beaver probed Diaz's thoughts. Should we acquire the kid's DNA? Body fluids, hair or even fingerprints should work. There's no need. We should give due respect to our future comrade. All right. But that kid is seriously incredible. But of course, your lieutenant commander has incredible insight, you know. Right, one more thing, do you think Scylla looks very familiar, Beaver? Diaz was caught in the dilemma again. Beaver gave it a thought, but he really couldn't figure out where he had seen him before. The galaxy is huge and there are countless people who looked similar to each other. You want me to enter the computer database and get a match? Never mind, put it on hold. He would need the B Squadron commander's passcode to enter the archives. Too troublesome. Diaz let out a sigh and gave up. Oh right, Lieutenant, the commander has urged us to join them as quickly as possible. It seems that the deal isn't going too well. Got it. Get ready to depart then. Diaz waved his hands and walked out of the door. Chapter 10. Unhappy Carrie. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Scylla did not give an immediate reply towards Diaz's invitation to join his squad. Diaz was not in a hurry either. Both parties needed an understanding process in between, as this would be beneficial for their rapport in the future. Every day, Carrie would pester Scylla about the benefits of joining the squad. Carrie wasn't one to be stingy with passion towards a capable person, and he was also a combat maniac. He would often drag Scylla to the training room to spar. Since it was a spar, naturally both sides did not use what they would normally employ to kill people, but even then, Carey was still very happy with the fights. Scyllan's boxing style was something that he had never seen before. Not only was it flexible, it also carried with it a strange atmosphere. Be it forceful or gentle, peaceful or deadly, it could change instantly to Scyllan's whim. Although Scyllan was a B-rank genotype, Carey would not purposely go easy on him either. This was because Scyllan had the power to go up against an A-rank genotype human. At the same time, Scyllan had learned quite a bit himself while training with Carey. Being exposed to different fighting styles was greatly beneficial for self-improvement, and while they were training, Carey had told him a lot of combat experience and provided examples. After all, Carey had far more experience than Scyllan as a hunter. For a squadron that often traveled between sectors, their combat personnel must know how to dogfight. Even if they weren't good at it, they had to learn at the very least the basic controls. The cost of a good fighter was too high, so Diaz would not allow Carey to drive one out for fun. And since he wasn't allowed to drive one, Carey dragged Scyllan to the fighter battle platform on the computer instead. Although it wasn't as enjoyable as the real thing, the simulation was still good enough that they could go at each other nicely for a few rounds. At first, Scyllan was unfamiliar with the vehicle. Although he had experience with hoverboards and trifibian flying cars on planet Brown Earth, he had never really come into contact with a fighter before. Carey had won the first few rounds, but in less than 5 rounds, Carey began to lose, and every defeat was faster and more miserable than the last. Every time, Carey would request to change to a different type of mech before they began competing again, and the cycle of victory to utter defeat would renew once more. Later on, Carey would still lose miserably even after they had changed to a new fighter. That guy isn't human. After yet another defeat, Carey logged out of the online battle platform and complained while scratching his messy hair. "Do you need me to comfort you?" A voice rang out. He sounded like he had just woken up. Scyllan looked over. A thin and tall young man about Carey's age wearing a sleepwear with a strawberry picture on it and snow-white plush slippers were looking at them curiously. Was he a childish spirit? It was hard to imagine that there would be someone dressed up like this on this ship. When Carey heard the voice, he wore a constipated look and kept silent. But anyone could see that he was feeling blue from the twitching of his facial muscles, because there would definitely be nothing good coming out of the voice owner's mouth. Did the fucker finish catching up on his sleep already? The fuck is he hanging around here for if he has nothing to do? You're awake, Yudi. Beaver said towards Yudi standing at the entryway when he walked in from the outside, then turned around and looked at Scyllan while laughing rather smugly at Carey. "Scyllan, you won again. You're improving really quickly, I see. The lieutenant is looking for you, he wants you to go to the control room for a moment." Scyllan nodded towards Yudi and greeted him once before leaving along with Beaver, leaving Yudi and Carey behind to glare at each other. So he's the Scyllan the lieutenant was talking about. Yudi looked right at Carey, judging from his reflexes and body coordination, and the level of control he has towards fighters, and combining that with some of the information I heard earlier, I have come to the conclusion. Carey covered his ears. I'm not listening. That he went easy on you in the match just now. Carey had the impulse to strangle this bastard Yudi to death. You call this comfort? Is this comfort? Yudi scratched his head, yawned and walked out of the door. Before he left, he didn't forget to leave behind a line that pissed off Carey so much he almost spewed blood. "You're so shit. I'm going to kill you." Sounds of fighting rang out from the battle room. Doe stopped its footsteps towards the battle room, turned around and escaped. There were 2 dangerous people inside, and when they fought, it was easy to be involved as an unwilling victim. Scyllan's sleep time had been increasing lately, and other than the times where he was pulled away by Carey to the battle platform for a few rounds of battle, the rest of his time were spent on eating and sleeping only. At first, Diaz and the others had thought that it was natural to rest since a lot of mental work exhausted one's energy. Yudi was one such example who would sleep for a period of time after making a large amount of calculations. But that explanation was quickly rejected because Scylla was just too good at sleeping. Even when he didn't fight Carrie, he would still sleep like his life depended on it, and there were signs that his sleeping time was growing longer and longer. The amount of time he used his brain and the amount of time he slept was completely out of proportion. Diaz had let the doctor on the ship to examine Scylla before, and the results was that Scylla was extremely healthy and that he could not explain why Scylla slept so much. Scylla himself had expressed that it had something to do with his own constitution. Diaz was so worried about Scylla's sleeping phenomenon that he had saggy bags under his eyes. Originally, he was planning to recommend Scylla to join the squad after he had reconvened with the other members of the 6th B Squadron, but some of the other lieutenant commanders had held an opinion against Diaz in the first place. If it wasn't for the fact that the 6th Squad's commander, Shotun, was Diaz's elder brother, his own position as a lieutenant commander would be at risk. Adding Scylla's lethargic situation into the mix, it might not be easy to convince them to accept Scylla into the main force. The competition between the 10 Vanguard B squadrons were growing more and more intense, and the A squadrons were already implementing a series of measures in order to surpass the other 3 Hunter regiments. Shotun did not explain any specifics to him, but Diaz knew that the 6th B squadron was in urgent need for expansion and achievements. The current difficulty they faced was a shortage of talent, which was also why Diaz was so eager for Scylla to stay. "You are a hunter,"